"Please don't cry, ma'am. My daddy can fix sad people." That's what the little girl had said, her voice soft and certain, as if grief were something that could be mended with the right pair of hands. Then, without waiting for permission, she had turned and led Joanna Wells toward a narrow trail half hidden in the snow-heavy trees. Beyond it, nestled low in a hollow beneath the ridgeline, a quiet cabin waited and a silent man within it. Wind River Pass, Wyoming Territory, February 1887. The wind shrieked across the mountains like a widow mourning the dead, its icy fingers clawing through pine branches and erasing the distant horizon in a storm of white. Snow fell in relentless silence, piling high, burying tracks, and swallowing the world in cold and quiet. The last rays of a dying sun bled weakly behind slate-colored clouds, failing to break through the storm's grip. Joanna Wells sat hunched on a jagged stone, half buried in the snow, her woolen shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, crusted with frost. Her fingers, once delicate, once ringed with gentility, were raw and cracked, stained with leather and earth, hardened by days of holding reins that had frayed and snapped. The wagon that carried the last of her past sat crooked 2 miles back, crippled by a shattered axle and abandoned in the snow like a carcass. The mule was gone, spooked, stolen, or simply done. Joanna no longer had the strength to care which. She only sat, unmoving, her palm wrapped tightly around a silver locket that had warmed no part of her hand. Inside the locket, a boy's face smiled back at her, wind-blown hair and bright eyes, a smile wide enough to carry spring with it. Samuel, her son. The chain had left a bloodless cut in her skin where she'd clutched it too tightly, but she felt none of it. Her voice cracked through her dry throat, more breath than sound. "Sam," she whispered, "I was supposed to keep you safe." She closed her eyes and let the snow sting her face, let the wind slice against her neck like knives. She didn't resist. She wanted it to take her. Let this cruel frontier swallow her too. Let her become another mother buried in ice. Then soft footsteps, barefoot, the impossible sound of life where there should have been none. A crunch, light, hesitant, yet purposeful. She opened her eyes. A girl stood before her, no more than 7. The child wore a coat too big for her thin frame, the sleeves dragging in the snow. Her dark hair was tangled in wind-whipped knots, and her cheeks were red from cold. But her eyes held something deep, something ancient, dark as burnt sugar, unblinking, bold. "Please don't cry, ma'am," she said gently, her small voice carrying over the wind. "My daddy can fix sad people." Joanna blinked at her, too broken to respond, too cold to rise. The girl stepped closer. "He's waiting. Our cabin's not far." Joanna finally spoke, her voice nothing but a rasp. "You're real." The girl gave a small, solemn nod. "Where's your family?" The child pointed behind her, into the forest heavy with snow. "Come," she said. "He doesn't talk much, but he helps." Joanna looked down again at the locket, at the empty trail, at the broken wagon and the ghost of a mule. Her tears had frozen on her cheeks. There was nothing left to lose. And in that little girl's gaze, she saw something that pulled at the last breath of warmth inside her, a mirror of the pain she had seen in herself the day she pulled her son from the river's edge. Pale and still, Joanna rose slowly, her legs aching with the stiffness of cold and grief. "All right," she whispered. "Lead the way." The child turned and walked, barefoot through the snow, the hem of her coat dragging like a ghost's train. Joanna followed her into the woods, into shadows where branches bowed low like grieving mothers. The trail narrowed, then wound into a hollow, and there it was, a cabin, low and weathered, smoke rising in a thin gray ribbon from its chimney. It looked forgotten at first glance, but as she stepped closer, she could feel it breathing. 3 horses stood still in a paddock nearby, snow crusting their backs. The girl walked to the cabin door and pushed it open without knocking. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, leather, and earth. A fire burned low. Joanna stood in the doorway, hesitant, uncertain. A man emerged from the shadows, tall, broad across the chest and shoulders, wearing a threadbare flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, his forearms thick with corded muscle. His beard was peppered with gray. His eyes, steady and unreadable, met hers across the room. He said nothing, gave no greeting, just watched. The girl passed him without a word and disappeared behind a curtain. The man stepped forward, pulled a chair toward the fire, placed a tin cup on the table beside it, then walked away. That was it. No invitation, no questions, just quiet hospitality. Joanna stepped inside, the warmth hitting her like a breaking wave. Her body trembled. She sank into the chair and reached for the cup, just water, but it felt like holy balm. The man moved through the room, setting a kettle over the fire, stirring a pot already simmering. He did it all in silence. There was a rhythm to him, the quiet routine of someone who had made peace with solitude. He glanced toward her boots, soaked and crusted with snow, then to the hearth. She hesitated, then took them off. He brought her a folded blanket and set it gently in her lap. Still no words, and yet Joanna had never felt less alone. Later, he handed her a bowl of stew. There was no ceremony, no gesture, just the giving of it. He sat across the room with his own bowl and began eating. Barley, onion, something wild elk. Perhaps it filled her belly, warmed her throat, softened the raw edges inside her. When she finished, she whispered, "Thank you." He met her eyes and gave the faintest nod, then rose and refilled her bowl. It was that small kindness that undid her. No one had fed her since Pennsylvania. No one had cared. And this man, this stranger, had given her more comfort in silence than all the words back east. Her throat tightened. She covered her mouth with her hand, and the tears finally came. He didn't watch her. He didn't ask. He simply turned his back to her, to the fire. As though granting her the mercy of falling apart unseen, she cried, quietly and completely. For the first time since the ice had taken her son, she wept without shame. The storm didn't pass it, simply softened. The days blurred. Outside, snow still fell, but inside the cabin, life found a quiet rhythm. Each morning, little Leah would rub the sleep from her eyes and shuffle into the room as Elias, already dressed, stepped outside with his axe. Joanna rose earlier each day. She fetched water, washed cookware with snow and ash. She burned her fingers on the stove more than once. By the third day, she could start a fire better than Elias. He never spoke, but she began to understand him, the way he liked his tools placed just so, how he paused before sharing space, how he carved quietly, slowly, patiently. He stitched Leah's old boots, carved spoons from pine, and when she thanked him, he only nodded and walked away. Once, while brushing snow from the horses, Joanna caught him watching her. His eyes weren't curious or suspicious. They looked as though he'd recognized something he knew. At night, when the others had gone to bed, Joanna stared at the fire and wondered if the world still remembered her name. Then, one night, she woke to sound. Elias, Anna, no, don't, Anna, please, words, not hers, not Leah's, his, a dream. He thrashed, breath caught. Joanna crossed the room barefoot and knelt by his cot. "It's all right," she whispered. She warmed a cloth by the stove and gently placed it on his forehead. His hand reached up, not panicked, not wild but searching. He found her wrist and held it, firm, not tight, like a drowning man holding driftwood. His thumb brushed over her skin. Once, she didn't move, didn't breathe, and in the hush of the cabin, firelight flickering, the snow howling outside, she understood something real had passed between them. Then Leah's fever came, without warning. By dawn, the girl shook under the blankets, her forehead burning. Elias moved fast, not frantic, only focused. He brewed herbs, set warm stones at her feet, pressed cloths to her face. Joanna stayed by the child's side, whispering the lullaby she once sang to Samuel. By midnight, Leah's breathing grew shallow, her skin lost color. Elias, so silent, so strong, trembled, and then, in a voice like breaking glass, he whispered, a name. Anna. Not the girl's, his wife's. Joanna reached out, touched his back. "Stay with me," she whispered, unsure who she meant. By morning, Leah's breath deepened. She lived, and Elias, he didn't leave her side. The next morning, something waited on Joanna's cot, a rough little wreath made of horsetail grass, bound by a black hair, a gift, a wordless promise. She didn't need to ask who made it. Later, she pulled a soft bundle from her satchel and placed it on the shelf. A child's drawing of a lake. A boy, a woman in blue. Samuel. Elias saw it, walked to it, placed his hand over the boy's face, his fingers spread wide, like a benediction. Then he laid his hand on his heart. Joanna cried. She didn't need words. His gesture spoke them all. Spring came slowly, drips from the eaves, horses pawing at thawed earth, streams whispering under cracked frost. Then, one afternoon, a new sound. Hoof beats, not Elias's, heavier, deliberate. A man rode into view, long coat dusted, a silver badge half hidden. His face was weathered, his voice like gravel. Is he here? Joanna didn't answer. Her hand gripped the doorframe. My name's Grady Kane. He knew me. I could see it in the stillness of his body. From behind her, inside the house, the soft scrape of a wooden chair broke the quiet. Elias appeared in the doorway, his coat still dusted with hay and barn soil. He didn't cross the threshold. He didn't blink, just stood there like time had wound itself tight and refused to move forward. Grady stared at him, long and hard, before speaking. His voice was low, more breath than sound. 12 years, Boone. Elias said nothing. I thought you were dead, Grady continued. Hell, I hoped you were. Still, Elias remained unmoved, as if silence had grown roots inside him. Grady's jaw clenched. You left it all behind. Not a word, no goodbye, just vanished after it happened. Joanna stood between them now, barely breathing, as if the very air had thickened around them. The weight in the room shifted, heavy and electric, like the charged sky before a summer storm. I tracked you for 2 winters, Grady went on. Then I quit. Figured the wilderness would bury you deeper than any court ever could. Still Elias didn't move, but Joanna noticed something subtle shift in his posture, his shoulders drawn tighter, like bowstrings pulled to the edge. Grady turned to her. Do you know what he did? Ma'am, she opened her mouth, but he didn't. Wait, he killed a man, shot him point blank behind the station house, a soldier. Claimed he was protecting someone. There were no witnesses, no warning. Just pulled the trigger and disappeared into the trees. Elias's jaw ticked, just once. Joanna stepped forward, her voice trembling but certain. He did it to protect someone. Grady looked at her, and for the first time, there was something nearly human in his expression, something like pity. I believe he thought so. Maybe he was even right. But the law don't run on feelings, ma'am. And Elias Boone doesn't get to vanish with a child and pretend the past won't catch up to him. Joanna turned to Elias, her voice softened into a whisper. Say something. But he didn't. He only turned and knelt beside Leah, who stood barefoot just inside the doorway, clutching the curtain like it could keep her anchored. He wrapped his arms around her, gently pressing her small head against his chest, as if committing the shape of her to memory. That undid something inside Joanna. This man, this quiet, guilt-burdened man, had never promised her safety with words, but he had given it in 1,000 quiet acts, in stillness, in presence. And now, because justice wore a face carved by men who'd never seen the fire in his eyes, she was being asked to tear that safety apart. Grady adjusted his gloves, his breath curling in the chill. I don't want to drag a child through the wreckage he left, so here's my offer. He looked at Joanna with steady eyes. You take the girl, ride back east, say nothing, start fresh. I'll tell them I never found him. Say he's buried under some snowdrift in the Absarocas. Joanna didn't answer. If you refuse, Grady said, voice flat, I'll ride straight to Laramie. Bring a marshal back by week's end. They'll take him in chains. And that child? She'll lose another parent, one way or another. The wind rose, lifting the edge of the porch cloth, as if the land itself shuddered. Elias didn't speak, didn't plead, didn't try to explain. He only held the child tighter. That night, Joanna couldn't sleep. Near midnight, she stepped outside to breathe. The moon cast cold silver over the trees, the snow beginning to thaw, revealing the ground. In patches, one plank of the porch had loosened slightly, swollen from winter's grip. Curious, she pried it free. Beneath it, wrapped in oilskin and tucked into the dark, she found a journal, leather-bound, stained, worn. She brought it inside like she was holding bones. The fire flickered low as she opened it. The handwriting was small, precise, a woman's, Anna Boone. Joanna turned the pages gently. At first, the entries were ordinary. Weather notes, chores, mentions of Leah learning to walk, Elias patching the barn roof in the rain. But then the tone shifted. April 7th, they came again today. Scouts in uniform. Said they saw smoke on the ridge. Elias doesn't trust them, neither do I. April 10th, they mistook Leah for one of the Indian girls who crossed the valley last week. She was playing near the river. One raised his rifle. Elias was faster. Joanna froze. Her fingers trembled. He didn't hesitate. Shot the man straight through the chest. The others fled. But they'll come back. I tried to grab the rifle, was afraid of what he might do next. I slipped. The gun fired. Tears stung Joanna's eyes. I remember Elias's scream. Not a word. Just the air torn from him. He hasn't spoken since. The final entry was dated a week later. If anyone finds this, please understand. He did it for his child. For me. He carries his guilt like stone. But he loves fiercer than most men breathe. If another woman ever comes into his life, tell her, speak for him, not because he can't, but because he no longer knows how. Joanna clutched the journal to her chest, rocking gently, weeping not only for Anna but for the man she had left behind. She stayed there until the fire had almost burned out, until morning light brushed the windows. When Elias came in from the barn, his coat smelling of hay and smoke, she was waiting. She held the journal in both hands. He saw it. He knew. She asked, "Why did you stop talking?" He looked at her, long and deep. Then slowly, he brought his hand to his lips, brushed his fingers gently across them, and placed that same hand over his heart. Not silence, grief, guilt, a vow. Joanna felt her breath catch. "Did she try to stop you?" She whispered. "Because she thought you'd be taken to." He gave the faintest nod. "She never blamed you," Joanna said. "And neither do I." She stepped closer, tears brimming. "I read her words. She said, if someone came, if someone loved you, they should speak for you." Elias's eyes softened. Not fear, not sorrow, something else. A flicker of something long buried. Joanna reached up, laid her hand on the place where he'd touched. "Because you are silent," she whispered, "I can finally hear what matters." She leaned her forehead against his chest. His heartbeat thudded strong beneath her fingers, warm, steady. He didn't move. Then slowly, one arm slipped around her, then the other. He held her, not with desperation, not with longing. With need. Human, quiet, healing. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, not warmth, but light. The snow retreated in banks, and the ground exhaled beneath boots. It was time. Joanna packed carefully, each item folded as if it might shatter. Elias helped preparing the saddle, measuring oats, slipping a flask of boiled water into her satchel. He didn't try to stop her. That was never his way. The deal stood. If she left, Grady would let him go. No chains, no trial, just another ghost lost to the wild. But she'd learned something else. Quiet wasn't always peace. Leah stood at the table, bent over a scrap of brown paper and a broken crayon, her tongue between her teeth in concentration. She looked up when Joanna approached and smiled, though it barely reached her eyes. "I made this," she said softly. Joanna took the drawing. 3 figures, crooked and uneven, stood beneath a swirling purple sky. Behind them, a little cabin, with smoke rising from its chimney. "They're holding hands," Joanna said, her throat tight. Leah nodded. "So you won't forget." Joanna dropped to her knees and hugged her close. "I never could." From across the room, Elias stood still by the hearth. He hadn't come closer, but she felt him, always like the heat from a fire you can't see. She stepped toward him. "I'll keep this," she said, holding up the picture. He nodded. She searched his eyes. He would never ask her to stay, would never beg. That was what made it so hard. She placed the drawing in his hand, turned, and opened the door. Outside, the air had softened. Her horse was saddled. Leah climbed up behind her. Neither of them cried. They had learned to grieve in silence. Joanna looked back once. Elias stood still in the doorway, the drawing in his hand. He gave one slow nod. Then he crossed the room, took the dried wreath from the shelf, lit it carefully, let it burn, and placed the ash in a glass jar beside a sketch of Anna's soft eyes. Wild hair. He set Leia's drawing next to it. He stood there for a long time, that no smile touched his lips, but in his storm-worn eyes there was something new. Not sorrow. Waiting. The cabin endured. Logs weathered, roof patched, fence repaired, smoke curled from the chimney. The horses grazed lazily. Elias brushed the mare's coat, slow and steady. Then he heard them dash HOOFBEATS. He froze. The mare pricked her ears. From the tree line, a figure emerged, a woman on horseback, coat worn, hair tucked under a travel-stained hat. She dismounted like she belonged on this land. Joanna. Her face was harder, but her eyes held warmth. She stepped forward, pulled a folded letter from her coat, held it out. He opened it. You don't need to say anything. I've heard your heart more clearly than any man who ever shouted to be understood. If there's still space by your fire, I'd like to build it with you for as many winters as we're given. He looked up, said nothing, then reached out, placed his hand gently on her shoulder. A promise. Joanna took his hand and held it to her cheek. The years vanished. Inside, the fire crackled. A new quilt hung where the old had worn thin. Above the mantel, beside Anna's sketch and the glass jar of ashes, sat the crayon drawing of 3 people beneath a purple sky. Joanna set down her satchel. Elias placed a second mug beside his own. He didn't ask if she was staying. She didn't need to say it. The fire burned higher. And some stories don't end in thunder or triumph. Some end with footsteps that stay, and a fire that never dies.